When we first made these terraces, they looked like a moonscape. Like, it's just crazy. Like, just no life, just clay. Like no life at all, because all of the topsoil had gotten buried. And in other situations where I had a bulldozer, I scraped all the topsoil off first, and then I did all my moving all the dirt around type of thing. And then I came back and used the bulldozer to bring that topsoil back over the land once it had been changed all around. But we didn't have a bulldozer, and to do that with a skid steer would have been an insane amount of work. So we instead had to build up the soil. One strategy that a lot of people do is they make their landform and then they buy truckloads and truckloads of topsoil and have it dumped on site. And that's definitely an option, but topsoil that's not native can come with all sorts of horrible pests in it, both macro pests and micro pests. And so there's these specific kind of earthworms which will like destroy any organic matter that is made by any plants. And that's something that I've heard of happening when you import topsoil. Or my friend Kaylin Campbell, who also teaches for Wild Abundance, who's going off about the dangers of topsoil. So we decided to not import topsoil, but we want to grow a lot of food here, hopefully one day. And so we need to build some serious soil, and beautiful, healthy, thick topsoil is kind of an absolute necessity if you're going to grow organically. And so we employed what I think is going to be a very successful method for building soil. And so the first thing that we did when we encountered our moonscape terrace is we had these local landscaping company had a bunch of wood chips that had partially decomposed. And so we had them drive in here with their little dump trucks, and they dumped piles of these composted wood chips, or slightly composted wood chips. They were still woody. And so this is kind of using the principles of hugelkultur, by which you bury wood under soil, and it actually does amazing things for the fungal growth and for just the life in the soil. So I was like, okay, we're going to do some hugelkultur here. So first we got these wood chips, and we got an amazing deal because they were wood chips he couldn't really sell because they were a little decomposed. And so they were like $30 for this mini dump truck load. So we had all these mini dump truck loads of wood chips dumped, and then we spread those, which was a lot of work to spread them. We had a lot of rakes being used to spread them. And then we took these giant hay bales, like these big round hay bales, and we rolled them out. And that was the easiest, fastest, most wonderful part of the whole thing, was adding massive amounts of organic matter through these hay bales. And it was hay that was also, I bought from Banks Lawn Care, this amazing local landscaping company, which I would highly recommend using if you happen to live north of Asheville. And so then we rolled all of those out, and they were from basically I told the guy, I don't want to feed them to animals. I want really crappy hay. And I want to make sure that it hasn't had, that it's from a field that no one's taking care of, and that they're not spraying anything on, because there's a lot of really nasty sprays that can go on to hay, like diazinon, that can make things not grow. And that's not what I want. It's kind of defeating the whole purpose of building soil. And so we rolled out those giant hay bales, and that was really fun and really relatively easy. It just took 2 people at a time to roll those out. And then this was the hardest part, was on top of that. So we had 4, maybe 6 inches of the wood chips. And then we had really a good healthy 4 inches of the hay. And then we topped it off with anywhere between 3/4 of an inch or 1.5 inches of composted horse manure. That was the most expensive of the inputs. It cost me, can't remember, I think $120 for a mini dump truck load. But we didn't actually use that many loads. And we spread that out pretty thinly over the hay. And then we seeded into that. And so at that time of the year, it was the fall. And so we seeded this Austrian winter pea, which is the thing that makes that it's a nitrogen fixer. We seed it in the fall, and somehow, I don't really know how this happened, but we seeded it with winter rye. The winter rye didn't come up, which usually winter rye totally outcompetes Austrian winter pea, but it didn't come up, and the winter pea did great. It can be really awesome to sow multiple cover crops together, because then, like, if you sow a legume in the presence of a non-legume, then that legume will actually fix more nitrogen than it would if it's not in the presence of a non-legume. But I've looked at the numbers, and, you know, that's something that I teach and that I've heard, you know, and that I've read. But the number of tons of nitrogen that are fixed into the form of nitrates, and there's all sorts of details about this in the notes below. If you want to read about it, I super dorked out. The amount of tons of nitrogen that is fixed when you combine a legume and a non-legume is not very different than it is when you just grow a legume by itself. And so because of the simplicity of just growing one thing, it can, as far as integrating into the soil and the timing and such, it can be nice to just sow like Austrian winter pea. Austrian winter pea is also often sown in the presence of oats, which are relatively easy to kill. Winter rye, on the other hand, is really hard to kill. And so I'm actually like, I sowed the winter rye with the winter peas because I was a little dubious about how well the winter peas would do, because they are much more wimpy in my experience than the winter rye is. But as you can see, the winter pea is doing awesome. It's beautiful and vibrant and taller than I've seen it, like, pretty much anywhere. And so I'm feeling like, you know, definitely, I mean, we'll see how it goes, but it seems like this soil building strategy is working quite well. And so at this point, I'm not going to be planting food crops aside from a small amount of sweet potatoes I'm going to be planting just because I have a lot of sweet potatoes coming and I don't have anywhere else to put them, and they'll kind of act as a cover crop. But I'm not going to be planting food crops in here for at least 1 year, until probably next spring. And so that will give, I'm going to spend like about 1.5 years building soil. And the amount of soil that I plan on building in this 1.5 years is, you know, at least a couple inches of nice topsoil. And it takes decades for that to happen just naturally in nature. So we are doing some like serious, like fast forward in the soil building activity. And that's partially because I brought in all those inputs from offsite. And it's also has to do with timing and really good strategy. And you'll also notice that I'm not planning on tilling in these inputs. I may till, well, we'll get to that later. So my next thing I'm going to do is I'm waiting until this Austrian winter pea is starting to flower. And then when the flowers bloom on cover crops, that is the optimal time for them to be killed to add nutrition to the soil. So what I'm going to be doing is crimping this Austrian winter pea. And there's this really great technique where you just take a T-post that you would use for fencing, and you strap it to two people's feet with the kind of pointy end down, the pointy side down. And then you just walk together and you crimp all of that plant matter down. And then that plant matter is on its way to dying. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the whole thing with landscape fabric. You could also use a silage tarp. There's lots of options. But basically, I'm going to smother, or in the special terminology is use occultation, to kill. There's solarization, but solarization is with clear plastic, which I think does not work as well. And so I'm going to use occultation to kill this winter pea, and that will and then after I occultize, this winter pea is basically all of the goodness of this winter pea is going to go into the soil. Like all these critters are going to come up and they're going to be eating the winter pea, these microscopic critters as well as macroscopic critters. And then in a couple weeks after covering it up, I'll lift the tarp up and it will just be just these little bits of debris that are in there, and I'll rake those off. And then I'm going to plant So my next round of cover crops. And so my next round of cover crops are going to be warm season cover crops. So winter peas and winter rye are awesome because they can survive the winter. But as far as nitrogen fixation and as far as surviving the heat of the summer, I'm going to need to get some things that are more suited for that. So I'm going to plant a mixture of brown millet, sun hemp, sorghum Sudan grass, and I want to say black-eyed peas, but cowpeas. So that's my plan for what to plant for the warm season. And because I really care about this cover crop germinating, I'm going to irrigate that cover crop so that I have really good germination. And so I'm going to take all of those, I'm going to grow them during the warm season, and then we'll see what I do. I might just kind of let that all get killed by the frost. I might cut it and then try to smother it and then plant winter peas again for the winter. We'll see how it goes. And probably this coming winter too, I'll plant tillage radish, which tillage radish is an amazing plant. And I tried to sow it in here, but it didn't take very well. I think the timing was off. But the tillage radish is so cool because it actually injects organic matter deep into the soil, which I think is really going to be helpful for mixing all of these different, penetrating into that clay soil. So when I said I don't like to till, generally I don't like to till, but I'm also into creating a proper mixture of minerals in a given soil. So it's likely that somewhere in this like establishment time of these terraces, I'm going to take soil tests and send them off to this company called Logan Labs that I really appreciate. They give a really thorough analysis of your soil. And then I'm going to remineralize the soil with all sorts of things but generally organic, but including like copper and boron and all these different things so that the plants that I do grow here will have the optimal combination of minerals to be able to grow healthy food. And that's something that Steve Solomon has an amazing book on this subject. So yeah, I probably will till just one time, and that's so that those minerals can get integrated into the top layers of soil.